name is Dan Hughes. I was the webinar trainer for Nik Software for years, from 2009 until basically 2014. I teach photography at the Rochester Institute of Technology now, and I'm actually in one of our technology labs giving the webinar. We won't go that route. We won't go down that road too much further than that. I just wanted to kind of give you a primer as a little bit of who I am and what I do. And today we are talking about getting started with Silver Efex Pro. On the 15th, we have a part 2 to this sort of webinar series, if you will, which is where we go further in depth into some of the interesting workflows and techniques and tools that once you get to know Silver Efex, you can kind of grow into. And I'm sure many of you are already using these things as well. Getting into the content itself, these are the things that we're going to be talking about, right? So we're going to be accessing the software from DxO PhotoLab 4, Adobe Lightroom, and Adobe Photoshop today. We're going to talk about non-destructive workflows and how you can edit an image and then come back to it later on in the future to reprocess it if you decide you want to make changes, or if you're selling something to a client and you want to redo something because they've requested. There's a really great way to do that. Actually in Lightroom, in the PhotoLab 4 version, as well as in Photoshop using Smart Objects. Now, we're going to get into the basic overview of the interface, how to use control points, one of the most important facets of the Nik collection, as well as global editing. And actually, as we move on here, I'm going to exit out. I believe Lori already sent you this link, and we can talk more about it later on during the Q&A. But to find more of these webinars and get more information about the Nik plugins, there's a few links that we're going to get you if we haven't already sent them to you. This is an important one, the dxo.com, nikcollection.dxo.com/webinars. And here's where you probably signed up for the first webinar, and then here is where you can sign up for the second part of the webinar if you can join us for the sort of advanced one. I'm going to minimize that because we've got to jump right in here. And one of the things that we'll talk about in the next webinar is more about sort of using these raw processing tools in conjunction with Silver Efex. For now, I want to just jump into the Nik plugins. And so I've already kind of got this image basically ready to go utilizing the PhotoLab 4 raw processor here. And software, I shouldn't just say raw process, does all sorts of other things as well. Now, to access the Nik collection from PhotoLab 4, what you'll do is move into the lower sort of right quadrant of the interface and click on the Nik collection button. And from here, we're basically going to be greeted with our plugin selector, where we can choose which of the Nik plugins we're going to utilize. For now, we're going to click on Silver Efex Pro 2, and it's going to launch the software for us. And just as another sort of side note to think about, because I've got to show you some of these settings in a couple minutes, I'm going to just click on settings right now to show you what my defaults are. Sorry, let me tell you again. I'm going to click on the settings button before we go into Silver Efex Pro 2. And as we do that, you can see the format, the size and resolution of the image that we're going to be bringing in. We're not going to worry about the watermark, and we're not going to worry too much about the advanced stuff. But I just want to show you this because when we work in the non-destructive workflow, so that we can come back later on and re-edit the image, you want to make sure that you're exporting as a TIFF file. I believe that that's the default, so if you've never changed it before, it should just work for you. But I wanted to point that out before we got into Silver Efex Pro. And then we're going to come back to this later on to go not necessarily more in depth, but I want to show you another option later on. So we click Export as TIFF, click the OK button, and I'm going to click into Silver Efex Pro 2. What's going to happen now, because this is a raw file, it's a Nikon raw file, .nef, you can see that in the lower sort of left quadrant of the interface, is our raw file is going to be duplicated into a TIFF file, a different file format, and then Silver Efex Pro 2 is going to launch, loading our image. As we launch into Silver Efex Pro 2, we're greeted with this first prompt. And I leave these prompts on so that when we do the webinars, you can see exactly what's happening as if it's the first time you've ever launched the software. But once you know and understand what these prompts are telling you, you can actually click the Do Not Show Again button, and it's not going to come back up until you reinstall your software or update. I'm sure is probably another time when you might need to click that do not show again and click OK. But long story short, what this is telling us is because we're dealing with a TIFF file, we can work in that non-destructive post-processing workflow. And again, just to sort of mention what that does, it allows us to reprocess the image afterwards if we wanted to. So I'm going to click OK. And then I'm just going to tap F on my keyboard. And that's going to just go from that sort of smaller window of Silver Efex Pro to a full screen view. So just tap F. I'm also going to close down those things because I'm going to make the interface look a little bit simpler for now. And we're going to walk through all of those tools on the right side in a couple minutes. Before we tackle the left side of the interface and I give you a little bit of a tour, I want to point out that this checkbox in the lower right quadrant or area is checked on. So it says save and edit later. It makes for a slightly larger TIFF file, but it allows us to come back later on if we want to. If you know that you're never ever going to need to do that with this particular image, you can actually just click that little checkbox off and you don't have to worry about it at all. If you think you might want to re-edit at some point or reprocess the photo, make sure that that's checked on. It's the layers, or sorry, the file isn't substantially larger. It's just a slightly larger file, and so it's almost you're almost better off just keeping that on, in my opinion, anyways. All right, so we've got that checkbox on. We've launched into Silver Efex Pro 2. The first thing to think about are the presets that are on the left side of the interface over here. And if you follow my cursor to the upper left corner, we start out within our preset library, where I have 58 presets that are built into the software. I think that's going to be the default, because that's the default for all of them. Any presets that you might make for your own processes are going to be in the custom section, which currently is in the lower left corner. We'll get to that. Let's start with our all set of presets, right? And what we're looking at here is a sort of heads up display to a ton of different potential looks that you could get out of Silver Efex Pro with just a single click. So right now we're on the neutral preset, but if I click on the underexposed preset, you'll notice a couple things. First of all, I clicked on it. It is now highlighted in gold. That's telling me that this preset is applied. Our image sort of snaps to, and it has that preset applied to it. And then you'll also notice as I click through the different presets, the sliders and the tools over on the right side of the interface are going to change, right? And they're changing based upon the preset that we've clicked on. So note this: brightness is at -14, contrast is at 13, structure's at 10. This preset, it's also doing other stuff. It's just sort of happening behind the scenes a little bit. Now, moving back over to the left side of the interface, we're going to go from the underexposed preset to the overexposed preset. And here's where you can see, as we switch through these different presets, a completely different look on the image. Now, we're not going to go through all 58 presets on this photograph. I don't think we need to. I think we get the point of what they are. They are potential looks for the image. I also like to say that these are starting points for our photographs. Now, if you click on one of these presets and it's perfect, you don't have to do anything else. You can just click the save button in the lower right corner of the interface and you're all set. But I don't think you'd probably be in this webinar if that's how you wanted to use the software. I assume you probably want to go a bit further and control the ebbs and flows in the look and feel of the photograph so that you can massage the image to get exactly what you want out of it. So before we do that part, I just want to show you, you've got your all presets in the upper left corner here. And then they are broken into these different sort of classifications of modern, classic, vintage. These en vogue presets are some of my favorites. They're actually presets that I've designed for the software and have been implemented into the tools. These are presets that I use all of the time. And so they're looks that I'm applying to my own images. And then the 25th anniversary ones, because Nick Software recently turned 25 years old, was actually created by our host, Lori Rubin. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lori, but I'm 90% sure that Lori made them. And they're really wonderful presets that add on to the presets that were previously built into the software. So these are some really nice ways of creating a completely different look to your photograph. I'm going to start over though. So we're actually going to begin this image with just a neutral preset. And I want to walk you through some of the global adjustments that are over on the right side. We're going to finish our tour later on. I'm going to show you the tools palette kind of up in the top and all the way across the right side, and some of the tools that are over here on the left side. But I'm going to do that sort of incrementally so that you don't get bored just with me walking you through the interface itself. So let's jump over into the global adjustments, and we can talk about at least the brightness, the contrast, and the structure tools, along with the subsets that you have built into each one. Right, so the brightness slider is a pretty self-explanatory slider. If you click on it and you drag it to the right, it's going to brighten the image, sort of all with a linear fashion almost, right? So basically, as you drag it to the right, it's going to brighten the image basically all at the same rate. Or if you take the image or the brightness slider to the left, it's going to darken the image all at the same rate, meaning the highlights, the midtones, the shadows, they're all going to be adjusted basically at the same time. If you click on the little twirler, that little triangle that's to the left of the label, it opens up into a subset of tools that pertain to brightness. And here is where we can control the brightness of our highlights, of our midtones, so the things that are, you know, in the gray zones, if you will, and then the shadows, which are the very darkest values. Right, so we can independently control all of these things, and I would mention these are global adjustments. So as I bring my shadow slider to the left, anything that is a shadow, a darker value, is going to get darker, right? So you can see I've now blocked up all of the shadow areas of his shirt and in his hair. It's completely blacked out. And if we didn't want to do that, we just wouldn't adjust that shadow slider so far. Maybe we'd bring it down just a little bit to get a nice base tone for our shadow areas. Underneath the highlights, midtones, and shadows is dynamic brightness. Now, this slider is basically brightness 2.0, right? It's a brightness adjustment. If I slide it to the right, it's going to brighten the image. But what it does as I slide it to the right is it brightens the shadows in darker tones more than it brightens the brighter tones, right? So now we have a brighter image overall, but I haven't blown out or washed out my highlights, right? So the brighter values aren't so dark. If we take that slider to the left, it does the opposite. It darkens the image down, but it darkens the brighter values more so than the darker values, and therefore now we have a low-key image, a darker photograph, but without losing our shadow detail. It retains the nice shadow textures within his shirt and within his hair. And it's a really interesting tool. And in fact, this algorithm, this dynamic brightness slider, along with a couple of the other ones, are the facets that really separate Silver Efex Pro from other black and white conversion tools. Being able to control these values, the brightness levels, in this way allows you as the creative photographer or designer or creative in general to do what you want with the image. So it behooves you to learn and to play with these tools. And if you're anything like me, you'll spend hours in this to get to know it. And then once you've gotten to know it, you'll be able to navigate quickly and easily. It definitely takes some playing, and definitely you should go into the, I would adjust different images as well. So here we have a portrait. Later on, we're going to look at some landscape stuff. It's nice to sort of jump around and you can kind of figure out how these sliders and tools are working with these different genres or kinds of photographs and tonal ranges and things. Moving into contrast. You have your sort of typical or standard contrast adjustment. Slide it to the right, it adds contrast. Slide it to the left, it removes contrast. If we click into our subset, we also have these other contrast adjustment capabilities. We have an amplify white slider, an amplify black slider, and soft contrast. Now, amplify whites and amplify blacks. As we open up an image into this software, the photo is kind of like assessed by the software. It figures out where the edges of things are and where the areas of things are, and it allows the software to almost compartmentalize the different areas and objects in the image. And what that means is that we have these interesting tools that pay attention to objects and areas in different ways. And so amplify whites, it's going to lighten up the lightest portion of an area, right? And basically what that means is, and it's hard to tell on this image, but the software might consider this whole area in the background to be one object because it's this uninterrupted sort of gradient area. The software might consider his forehead to be its own object, that his hair to be kind of its own object, his eyes to be their own objects, and shirt, and so on and so forth. And so by sliding the amplify white slider up, the software is looking at those areas and brightening the brighter values in those sections. Amplify blacks, kind of doing the opposite in terms of it's looking at those areas and then it's darkening or darkening down the darker values of those objects, right? And so this is, again, a specific algorithm that is inside Silver Efex Pro that allows us to create a look to our black and white image that's different than other pieces of software because of these very specific tools and algorithms. All right, so soft contrast, if we slide this to the right, it doesn't really work to bring it all the way to 100, but you can see what it does. It creates or adds contrast to the image, but it has a soft glowing kind of effect. If you remove soft contrast, it's the opposite, right? The image is now looking more flattened. There's less dimension overall. And you can just get a feel for this sort of harsh feel that happens when you remove the soft contrast algorithm. So if you want a really grungy look, a lot of times removing soft contrast can be a really interesting way of obtaining that. If you want the image to be a little more soft, adding some soft contrast can be nice. I kind of like what's happening with just a little bit of soft contrast on this photograph. And moving into structure. So if brightness allows you to brighten or darken tones, and then contrast allows you to add contrast, darkening shadows, brightening highlights. Structure is a texture adjustment. So what it does, and let's zoom in. So I'm going to tap Command plus 2 times. It's going to bring us into a 50% zoom. You can see we have a navigator in the upper right corner as well. I'll kind of go over that a little bit more in a couple minutes. But the structure tool, if I go ahead and slide this slider to the right, it's going to increase the texture within the image, right? And again, it's doing that because the software has assessed the photo and it finds the little edges and areas, can delineate those things for us. And as you slide that slider to the right, it's going to add that texture. Basically, it's enhancing texture that's already there. Technically, it's not adding anything. It's just, it's not adding information, that is. It's just adding contrast in certain areas based upon how structure is doing it. If you remove structure, it's the opposite. It smooths out textures kind of nicely, and it allows for you to, again, kind of create an image that fits the aesthetic that you're after. Just like a brightness, you break structure down into the texture of the highlights, the texture of the midtones, and the texture of the shadows globally here. So if I needed my shadow areas, like his eyebrows and the pupils of his eye and iris of his eye, to maybe stand out and have more texture, I can bring that shadow structure slider to the right, and it's going to increase that. With great power comes great responsibility, I think, in this sort of case of making adjustments to an image. It's really easy to take these algorithms and tools really far, and that's fine if it fits your aesthetic and your image. But the problem that I've run into if I add too much of this stuff is that the grungy effect is sort of like a one-trick pony, at least without controlling it a lot. If you just take these sliders all the way up to the right, at first it looks pretty cool, but after a few seconds, at least for my eye, it starts to hurt. I can't look at the image very much, and I like nuance, even when we have kind of punch you in the face kinds of textures, if you will, and contrast and so on. And the nuance comes from control. So all of these things that we've done so far have been global adjustments. And where the control comes into play, in my mind, is control points. Before I can jump into control points, because I skipped it, I'm sorry. I skipped over fine structure. So let me show you what that is. Fine structure is a texture adjustment as well. It's structure, but it's finer. It's down at an even smaller level. So if we were to do a kind of comparison between 100% fine structure and 100% regular structure, you'd see a significant difference. And this one works really nicely for bringing out textures of very, very small details. And the standard structure slider does a good job of bringing out general overall textures throughout the whole image. So with that, I'm going to bring that up just a little bit with fine structure. And I used a shortcut just a second ago, and I didn't tell you that I was using a shortcut. So let me tell you what that is. So if you adjust a slider to any point, negative or positive, and you want to get it back to its default, there's a couple ways of doing that. You can, of course, click on the slider and drag it back. You can click on the number on the slider and just use your keypad and type in 0 or whatever percentage or number you want. Or you can also just double click on the slider and it's going to home that slider. It gets it back to its default. Now that we know that, I'm going to go ahead and tap Command 0. And what that does is it zooms us back out to a fit to screen, right? So before I used the shortcut Command plus, I think that's Control plus if you're on a PC, or Control minus will also zoom out. So nice little shortcuts to get to know. And those are also similar to other pieces of photo editing software. So those are nice sort of holdovers. As I've zoomed out, I can see I've added too much structure overall. So I'm going to remove the base structure. And now I've just got some highlight, midtone, and shadow structure in there. I'm going to explain control points like pretty in depth in the next few minutes. But for now, I kind of want to just finish this image off with a couple control points. I think what we could use to balance out the tone of this photograph is a little dodging of his shirt. We'll brighten it up, dodging his eyes a little bit, maybe a little bit underneath his eyes, and then we'll burn the corners, the top corners of the image just a little using these control points. And the way that you use them is you just click the control point button, it's an add control point button, and you go and just place the point on the object that you want to adjust. Let me move that for a second. Each control point, every control point that you place on the image is going to make a selection for you. You place the point on the object, it makes a selection. And it makes this selection inside of this circle, although it's not making a circular selection. Unless you place the control point on a ball or maybe on his eye, it would make a circular selection. But in this case, on his shirt, it's making a selection inside of the circle on the shirt of the shirt based upon the tone, the original color in the original image, and textures. Right? So what this is going to do, if I were to, let's say I make it a little bit smaller, I'm going to make it this size, and then I move into my adjustment sliders, like the brightness adjustment slider. Sorry, let me collapse this. It's not letting me collapse it. There's a little twirler so you can collapse or expand brightness, contrast, and structure into the subset of tools. I'll show you those. But let's say we wanted to dodge his shirt a little bit. Well, with this relatively small control point, I can bring up my brightness 10-15% or so. And now we're getting a little bit more detail out of his shirt. But it's really only going to affect what's inside of the circle and a little bit of the shirt outside of the circle. Right? And in fact, if I were to take my brightness slider way up, you can see what it's affecting, right? So it's not really adjusting his face or skin very much. It's not adjusting the background. It's primarily adjusting his shirt. And it's doing that because the software understands that we've placed the point on the shirt and we only really want it to affect the thing that we've placed the point on. I do want to make the adjustment a little more subtle, so I'll back that off. And then what we'll do is we'll expand the area of influence out, right? So we'll just put one kind of large control point on his shirt, and the software should do a pretty good job to understand what we want to dodge or burn based upon where we've placed the point. From there, let's take a couple more control points. I'm going to put one right in his eye. I'm going to size the area of influence to be very small, and for both my sake and so that we can kind of get a feel for what's happening, we're going to zoom in. I showed you that shortcut a few minutes ago, the Command plus. let's go ahead and use the sort of interface way of zooming in. So if you follow me to the upper right corner of the interface, we'll go ahead and click on our zoom button, and I'm going to zoom in to 50% so that we get a better idea of what I would be doing with these adjustments. As we do that, there's a little twirler that's underneath the control point, and this allows us to open up our subset of tools. So every control point within Silver Efex Pro is going to have the area of influence slider. It's the size of the selection. It's going to have brightness, contrast, and structure. And then if you click on that little twirler, that little triangle there, it expands into amplify whites, amplify blacks, fine structure, and then even selective colorization. So if we wanted to have a black and white image with a spot of color, you can use the selective colorization slider to yield that result. I'm going to go ahead and dodge his eyes a little bit and add just a smidge of structure directly into his eyes. If I add too much, it'll become obvious. As we zoom back out, his eyes will sort of stick out like he's Rasputin or something. And we don't want that. In this case, anyways, I think it's better to be a little more subtle. I want the exact same adjustment on this eye as what we've got in his left eye, camera right. So what we'll do is we'll duplicate this control point and place that duplicate over here in this eye. Of course, we have several ways of doing that. My favorite way of doing it is to hold down the Option key on a Mac, or Alt if you're on a PC, and while you're clicking on the control point, while holding down Option/Alt, click and drag the point you want to duplicate. And that's going to give you a duplicate control point. And I like it because it's just fast. I can just make a whole bunch of these duplicated control points really quickly. Now, I don't want these 5 up here, so let's delete them. This one is active right now, so I'll just delete or click the, I'll hit the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of it. And that's how you can get rid of control points. You just tap on it so it's active. It's active when you can see the sliders, and you tap delete on your keyboard. Another way to do it, if you wanted to delete like 3 of them or more at one time, you can actually just click anywhere that's not on a control point, drag, and that creates this bounding box. So click and drag, and then highlight the image, or sorry, highlight the control points, tap the delete key on your keyboard, and it's going to get rid of it. It's going to ask first if you're sure you want to get rid of them. I'm going to say yes, and then it gets rid of them. All right, so that's a basic intro into control points. I'm just going to finish this image off with one control point here, and I'm going to leave a little bit of extra work for us, because I want to put a control point over here, but I'm going to show you this trick / workflow for being able to reprocess the image. Okay, let's say we like what we've got so far, and I wanted to see the before and after. I'm going to click the compare button in the upper sort of left corner, and as I click and hold the compare button, I see the before image. As I let go of the compare button, I see the after. Let's say we're happy with this for now, and we're going to click the save button in the lower right corner to have our adjustments saved onto our image. So we're going to click the save button, and then as it's closing, I might say, oh shoot, I forgot to put a control point in the upper left corner of the image, or you know what, maybe I needed to add a vignette on the photograph or change it in some way. Because we had that checkbox on in the lower right corner of the interface, and we're working with a TIFF file, we're able to reprocess the photo. So right now we've got our original image, and in PhotoLab we have our enhanced image saved here. And let's say we wanted to reprocess it. From PhotoLab, what you would do is click on the Nick Collection button. Well, first of all, click on your image that you want to adjust again or reprocess. Click on Nick Collection. And now before we go into Silver Efex Pro, you have to click on the Settings button. And now with this setting, we do not want to export as a TIFF file, because what that would do is it would duplicate this TIFF file and make a new one. We don't want to do that. We want to open this exact file. So to do that, you click the Action drop down or pop up, and you click Export Selected Files Without Processing. When you do that, and now I click the OK button, now when I move into Silver Efex, it will launch that image back into Silver Efex. You're going to see any presets that you've applied, any tools that you've applied, or in our case, the adjustments and our control points will be saved here. So I can just Option, click and drag over our control point, maybe go into the finishing adjustments. I'm just going to add a little bit of like a warm tone. In fact, let's use a preset. Let's use, I'm going to use a selenium toner. It's a little bit cool in blue. Click the Save button, and again, it's going to save the image back over into our PhotoLab software. Because our checkbox is saved, it updates the image, and we can come back later and reprocess as we see fit. Now, I've talked about this image for quite a long time, so we're going to keep moving here. I'm going to jump over into the Lightroom, into Adobe Lightroom. I'm going to show you how to launch the software, and then we'll take it from there. So the next image that we'll get into is this photograph, and I've already made a white balance adjustment to the image. It isn't the most dramatic photograph, and like I said before, we don't get to talk about the raw processing aspect here because we're already 30 minutes into the webinar and we're just getting to our second image. We could talk about what we could do to the image before we even take it into Silver Efex for hours, probably. So let's skip that part. Let's just jump right into the Silver Efex Pro software, and in which case you can do that from Lightroom whether you're in the library module or the develop module. And to access the Nik plugins, in this case Silver Efex, the quickest and easiest way in my mind is to right click on your image. So anywhere on your photograph, right click, go to Edit In, and then within Edit In you're going to have any of the Nik plugins and other DxO software that you might have installed as well, just ready to go. Now we'll click on Silver Efex Pro 2, and these options pop up. And what this is asking us is if we want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, because we're dealing again with a raw file, we have to make a duplicate. So the key to working in a sort of non-destructive process is to make sure that in the copy file options, you are dealing with a TIFF file format. So you want to make sure that that says TIFF. And it should. I think by default in Lightroom, that is what will happen. But if you've ever gone in there and changed that, you want to be careful of it if you want to work in that non-destructive workflow that we just played around with PhotoLab. All right, we're going to click Edit. Lightroom is going to duplicate our image as a 16-bit per channel TIFF file. We might start with a preset as a starting point on the photograph. Again, we're going to get this warning. Usually you would click Don't Show Again because you're aware of what it's telling us. It's a TIFF file and we can reprocess the image. I'm going to click OK here and just kind of let it go. I'm going to click into my En Vogue presets. I'm going to scroll through to see if there are any presets that I think work the best for this image as a starting point. I think contrasty might be helpful. I think it's a little too much punch. Look at Ominous Fade is definitely interesting. Highly transformative. Let's do more silver. I like what more silver is doing because it still looks and feels realistic, but to get a feel for what it's doing, let's take a look at the before and after just by clicking on that preset. I'm going to click on the split preview here. And what you're going to see when you clicked on the split preview is anything on the left side of the image is the original or is in your history state where you've got that set to. And then on the right side, your enhanced image. In this case, we've just clicked on the preset. So that's what you're going to see. If you click on that little red line and drag it back and forth, you can see the before and you can see the after by dragging that. You can actually rotate this line as well if you didn't want to go left and right, but you wanted to go from top to bottom to see your before and after. And you do that by clicking the little rotate button at the top or on the right side of the interface, and you can see the before and after. The other way to view a before and after is a side-by-side preview. So if you follow me back into the upper left corner of the interface, I click on side-by-side, and I'm going to see the original image on top, the enhanced image on the right, or sorry, on the bottom. If you click on the twirl button, now on the left you're going to see the original, and on the right you're going to see the enhanced. Now, this is not the nicest way to view the image in this case, so there are a few other options for viewing. So if you follow my cursor to the upper left, there's a little triangle with a box, and if you click on that, it hides those presets or that left panel. You can do the same thing on the right. So if you move into the upper right corner, hide that panel. Now you've got your before image on the left and it's bigger, the after image on the right, and you can actually see what it's doing because you've got some screen real estate to do that. One other button before we get our adjustment panels back that I want you to note is that in the upper right corner, just to the left of our collapse expand button on the right side of the software is the change background color. And what this does is it toggles between a very bright gray, middle gray, and then basically black, so that you can view your image on different backgrounds, which is very helpful for kind of assessing and getting a feel for your photo. I personally leave this at middle gray for most of my processes, and then I just sort of toggle through this if I want to see what it looks like on black or on a lighter tone. I leave it on middle gray because it's easier on my eyes, and it gives me a better sense of what's happening in our black and white conversion in my mind. So you could get your panels back by tapping on those buttons again, or the shortcut that's really handy is just the tab key. So if you tap the tab key on your keyboard, you can get both the left and the right panel back. We're going to click on our single image view just to give our image a little bit more real estate. What the heck, let's get rid of our presets. And we have a little bit bigger space here. I love what the preset is doing to our image globally, but I want to make some adjustments selectively and talk a little bit more about control points. So follow me to the right side. We're going to click on the control point. I'm going to drop a control point on our sky here, and let's see what happens if we burn the sky, darken it down a little, add a little bit of contrast, and then add a little bit of structure. Let's add a lot of structure, but we'll pull it back, right? So these clouds were exceedingly subdued in the original image. It was pretty flat lighting, and the beauty of these tools is it allows us to bring back these textures that are in the image, but we're expanding upon them. We're bringing them out. So I'm going to burn that down even more. I do want to be careful. I don't want to take it too far. I don't mind that it looks somewhat unnatural in this case. In fact, I kind of prefer that in my mind, and I like that because as soon as we get into the realm of black and white, we're already escaping a sense of reality, right? We're removing the color from this place, which allows us to kind of push the image, not necessarily as far as it could go, but a lot further than maybe we could push a color image and still have it be perceived as realistic. And that's completely subjective, of course. That's my own opinion. Now, control points. We've darkened down, burned down the sky a little bit. Let's keep placing control points here and there, and then I'll show you what these control points are doing in terms of making their selections, because you can actually get a really precise selection out of these control points. And you can, for example, we can adjust this section of trees and darken them down. And then I can take another control point and I can place it in this sort of lighter section of the trees, and we can dodge these. So now we have this kind of interesting layering from the trees that are right on the shore to this middle line to these other trees back here. And it just yields this really beautiful, simple way of dodging and burning without having to spend much, if any, time really kind of controlling or worrying about having to make precise selections, because the control points do it for us. All right, let's look at these control points. I'm realizing it's 3:41 already. Time flies when we're having fun like this, and hopefully this has been useful information for you. Following me over to the right side, I'm going to open up the control points. Right, so we've clicked on the control points button before, but anytime you see a little twirler, a little triangle here, you click on it and it opens up into your subset of tools, or in this case, our list of control points. The control points are listed out by way of which one you've placed on the image. If you click on a control point, it is highlighted in gold. And just to sort of demystify what's happening here, there's a checkbox on the left side of each control point. If you turn that off, you see the before and the after. So turn it off and it's not applying the control point. Turn it on and it's applying whatever the adjustment sliders are doing. You've got the control point name. You've got the area of influence. That is, this one control point is covering 60% of the image. Doesn't mean it's affecting 60% of the image, it's just covering 60% of the image. And then on the far right, the far checkbox here shows and or hides the selection. So what you're looking at now, as I've got that first control point clicked on, is anything that is white in this selection area is being affected by the control point. Anything that's black is not being affected by this control point, and anything that's gray has some of the adjustment on it. So this control point is seemingly adjusting a little bit into the water and a little bit into the farmhouse here. And if we didn't want the farmhouse to be affected by that control point, here's how you clean up a selection. You just take another control point, place it on the object that's being affected by that point, and you're able to clean this up, right? So I'll go and place new control points. I'm just holding down Option, making duplicate kind of blank control points, and I've placed them on the parts of the parts of the farmhouse and parts of the actual silo and barn there. And now this control point number 1, is not affecting those areas anymore because we've cleaned up that selection. Now, if we were to look at another selection, let's go to this image or this control point number 4, and we click that one on. And as we click it on, you can get a sense of the kinds of detail that you can get, again, just by placing the control point. In fact, if you click on the control point and you start dragging it around, A, it shows you what's being affected, and B, it allows you to very specifically place the control point so that you get the effect that you want. Personally, if I'm moving the control point around, I actually don't have the mask on. I would prefer to kind of place the point, make my adjustments, and then move it around and be able to see it visually, not necessarily the control point, but the adjustment that I've made. As if I were to, let's say we take it too far and I start dragging that around, it gives you a better sense of what's being affected because you can actually see the result of it. The looking at this selection is quite nice, and being able to do that is very helpful using this tool over here on the right, but I actually don't find myself doing it all that often. I just find myself using the control points and making the adjustment that I like or want on the image. You know what? Instead of using control points to burn the water down, let's skip the color filter for now and the film types, and let's move into the finishing adjustments. I want to show you the other two tools there, color filter and film types, in a couple minutes, but we're going to skip into the finishing adjustments. I've already used one of the toning adjustments on that last portrait that we looked at. There's a vignette tool. I'll show you that. For now, we're going to skip into burn edges. The burn edges tool allows you to either use a preset where all of the edges would be burned down based upon that preset, or darken down. It's called burn because we're burning it in, we're darkening those tones down. It's a holdover from the days of darkroom. There's probably folks out there in this webinar that still work in the darkroom. I'd like to myself. But anyways, we're just gonna burn that bottom edge down. We're gonna go ahead and click on the bottom edge. So each one of these buttons here allows you to control which edge you're affecting. The strength is how dark the effect is going to be, or how much you're going to burn that area down. The size is how far into the image you're going to encroach, and the transition is the gradient. So the transition is the gradient from the edge into the middle, right? And so I'm not going to leave my strength up at 100%, but I am going to sort of reduce my size. I've got my transition way up at 100. I'm going to reduce that just a little bit, and I'm going to bring my strength down. And now what we're getting out of this is a sort of burned edge, darkened down bottom edge, which is going to help to direct the viewer's attention into the middle of the image, into our farmhouse, into the layering of our trees a little bit. And we could probably even take these things further than we did. I think I'm being a little bit hesitant to do that. I am going to just add some structure into that mountain back there. That might be Whiteface Mountain. I think I can see some trails there. This is Lake Champlain, and it's northeastern New York. That's what we're looking at right now. So let's take a look at the before and after. This is the original image. We used a preset and then several control points along with our burn edges tool, and this is our resulting image. So dramatically changed into a completely different photograph. And in my mind, you know, I have taken some of these tones and really pushed them pretty far, but it still looks really good, in my opinion. And let's say we're done. We click the save button. Lori, it's 3:47. I've got to show Photoshop, and I want to show a couple more tools. So I want to show, I'm going to do that on 2 images very quickly so that we can access the software and get a sense of what's happening. All right. So that image is open. Let's take a look at this photo. I'll open this one over into our Photoshop. So we're going to take this image from Lightroom over into Photoshop. I want to show you film types, and I'll show you color filters on this image. So we're here in Photoshop now. to launch the software, there's two different ways of doing it. You can go to the filter drop-down up at the top portion of the interface, go down to the Nik collection and choose Silver Efex or whichever of the Nik plugins you want to use. Or you can go to the Nik selective tool and you can just click on Silver Efex Pro. Now there's a bunch of different ways of viewing viewing the Nik selective tool. There's actually a webinar that's available on that Nik webinar website. And you can check out all of the different ways of sort of using that Nik selective tool. For now, for the sake of time, we're going to click on it. I want to show you film types. I want to show you the color filters, which I'm not sure if this image is going to be greatly affected by the color filter tool here on the right side of the interface. But what this tool does is it emulates what would happen if you were to use a glass color filter over the lens of your camera when shooting black and white film. So the neutral button here is no color filter. If I click on the red color filter, anything that's red in the image or on the red end of the color spectrum is going to lighten. Anything on the blue or the other side of the color spectrum, if you will, is going to get darker, right? So if we click on the blue color filter, you can see the color or the tones shift pretty dramatically. Right, so we get a completely different photograph depending upon which of these color filters we click on. Not only do you have the sort of 5, not standard, but very usual color filters, glass color filters that you can emulate, but there's a details section where you can control the strength of it, and you can basically create any color filter you want by clicking on that hue slider and just dragging it around until you get the effect that you want. So let's say we like that. I do like this one. And you know what? It kind of makes sense that we're going to use this image for the film types adjustment because this is the Big Shot photograph from 2015, which is a project that we put on here at RIT, a public art project where we meet the public out at an event at a place and we paint with light at night to illuminate a large structure. In this case, it's the Kodak Tower. So why not emulate the Kodak film by going into the film type section, clicking on the drop-down menu here, and here we have a boatload of film emulations. So if, let's say, one of my favorite films, actually, I absolutely love Panatomic X. Panatomic X is a 32-speed film that actually they stopped making around 1985. And I have a small cache of it still. But if you click on that, or if you simply scroll over the film type, you can see what this image would have looked like with those other adjustments that we've made, and in this case, the color filter that we've made up as well. But if you just scroll over the different film types, like let's say you never shot film, but you do like the look of these different films, you don't have to worry about the fact that this is emulating Kodak 100 T-Max or Rolly Retro, right? You just have to enjoy the look or the feel of it. But I say in our case here, let's go into, let's go to T-Max 400. And let's say we love this, but we wanted to affect maybe the development process of that film. Well, we can go and change the amount of the grain that we're getting out of the film. We can go and change the color sensitivity, which is basically how the colors are converted from color to black and white. And in this case here, you can change the curve. So this might be a good thing to do in this case because the image is primarily very dark tones. So I'm going to lighten up those dark tones a little bit to the point where my Dmax, my darkest value, is actually not even black. And then we're going to get some detail out of that. And we have like an interesting film emulation that we've created and we've now customized. So with that, I'm going to click the OK button. I feel like I'm rushing the end here, but I want to make sure that we get through this entire tool set, and I want to show you how you can save your own presets as well, your own custom presets that you might want to use. All right, so we've got our Kodak Tower there. Let's jump over into Chicago. This is an infrared image shot with it's false color infrared photograph. I'm going to click on Silver Efex Pro 2 because this is a lovely piece of software for converting false color infrared images into black and white. So we could start with a preset. I say in our case, we start with a film type. I'm going to use that Panatomic X, and I'm going to move into my global adjustments and just add a little bit of structure. Let's take a control point or two, and I know I'm moving quickly here, but I guess it gives you a sense of the speed in which you could actually make these adjustments. So I'll add a control point. We'll dodge the building a little bit more, add a little bit of structure. I'm going to duplicate this control point here, maybe place one down at the bottom as well, where I'll also dodge those tones just a touch. And then I want to add structure into our nice glowing trees. So the trees are showing up white. For anyone who's not familiar with infrared photography, it's basically using invisible to our eyes information, and it is not taking in much, if any, of the color information in this case, because of the way that the camera has been augmented and changed. And that's what's going to create this otherworldly kind of glowing foliage effect. Okay, so we've adjusted our global adjustments, we've applied our film type. Let's move into our finishing adjustments. I'm gonna add a nice coffee or sepia tone to the image. Maybe I'll make it a little bit more subtle by just dialing the strength back a little bit. I'm gonna burn that bottom edge in again, because that's gonna make a nice sort of burned bottom edge. It just kind of gives me a nice base. And then I'm gonna finish the image off with an image border. So in the finishing adjustments, these are kind of like the finishing touches that you'd put on the image at the very end. And the software has these really nice film borders. I love using them for all sorts of applications myself. And I personally like type number 1. I'm gonna take the size out, so kind of away from the center of the image. I'm gonna reduce the spread, which is gonna get rid of that stroke that's around the edge. And now, rather than having, oops, zoomed in too far, rather than having just an edge that's a 90-degree edge on the side of our image, now I have this kind of more organic looking edge, which I prefer in a lot of situations. Now, of course, that's totally subjective, but I think this is a pretty cool looking edge here. I'm happy with our result, and I have all sorts of other infrared images that I want to convert, and I want to have a similar look. So I'm going to save this as a preset. And to do that, I'm going to go down, I'm going to open up our preset section over here on the left. I'm going to click on the custom button, and I'm going to name this custom preset. So I'll call this Chicago, hopefully, Chicago, if I could spell, Chicago IR preset. You know, I don't need the preset word, but I'm going to click OK. And that saves our preset into this custom section here. With that, I'm going to click the OK button, and I'll turn it over to Lori because I assume we've probably got some questions, and I've kind of gone over on time by about 10 minutes. So, Lori, do we have any questions? Go ahead.
We do have some questions, and I want to start out by saying we have a lot of questions, but what I'm trying to do is kind of condense them enough that we can get to the ones that most people are asking, and hopefully I answered some of yours in chat. So Dan, to start out with, Joyce is asking, do you ever use Vivesa before jumping into Silver Efex? And do you ever use Color Efex in conjunction with Silver Efex?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. You know, we don't have enough time to kind of talk about all of the potential workflows. I don't tend to use Vivesa before I go into the Nik plugins anymore, because I'll use PhotoLab 4 has control points with the same capabilities, except I'm working with the raw information, the raw data itself. So, but if I were to be launching from Lightroom or from Photoshop, absolutely I would use Vivesa 2 to selectively dodge and burn, and then I wouldn't have to do it when I was within Silver Efex the same way. I do combine Color Efex Pro with almost every photograph that I personally use Silver Efex Pro 2 with. Yeah.
Okay, and this is a little bit similar, but it's James is asking overall workflow, top to bottom. Do you go through the palettes from top to bottom, or do you start out with color filters or presets? What's your personal workflow?
I see. Yeah. So in Silver Efex, I'm going to delete that preset that we just applied. We'll go back in. So I would suggest, you know, starting with a preset if there's one that gets most of the work done for you, right? So the idea of the preset is to A, show you some potential of what your image could look like, right, by just clicking on it or applying it. And B, it allows you to kind of skip the line so that you don't have to do as much adjustment on the right side. But the idea of the layout of the software is to basically start with a preset and then make your way down the right side of the interface. Personally, I like to go by working globally to very selectively. So I try to adjust the most transformative things first, and then get more specific as I go. So if I'm going to use a film type or a color filter, I like to kind of either start out, or that's sort of the beginning of my process within Silver Efex, and then I might fine tune with global adjustments, go into my selective adjustments, and finish with the finishing adjustments. But that's a great question. You know, at some point it becomes your own process, but you decide the way that you like it. But I figure do the global things that are going to be highly transformative, like the color filter, right? The color filters are going to be exceedingly transformative with basically any image that has color in it. Your film types are going to be pretty transformative right off the bat, and they're global. And then your global adjustments obviously are also global, although you don't necessarily have to, you know, really go in and adjust every single slider. You might decide that you just like to bring the brightness down a little bit, and then take your midtones down a little bit. You know, you don't have to use every single tool on every single image. In some of my demos, I kind of use all of them to explain the tools, but in a regular process, you might only use global adjustments, or you might only use a film type if that's what's getting you there.
Great, stay in that section, Dan, because Michael and Patrick have a question. Does the use of dynamic brightness override the adjustment made with the ordinary brightness controls?
That is a very good question. So no, they will work kind of in tandem with each other. So if we, in an interesting experiment to play with as you open up Silver Efex, if you take the brightness up pretty far and then you take the dynamic brightness down, you can get a pretty interesting feel, right? Because now the overall image is much brighter, but we're kind of taking those highlight tones and bringing them back down a little while retaining a much brighter photograph. So as far as I know, the way the tool works is that whatever is up above in the brightness section, or if we, you know, sort of select out the contrast thing, whatever's the top adjustment is sort of like, I don't want to say it's the master, if you will, but it's where it starts out, especially if you begin that way. If you, in your workflow, start with the brightness adjustment and then move into dynamic brightness, I think that makes sense. But you want to use them hand in hand, and neither of them will necessarily negate the other, but you can get some really interesting looks if you sort of split them. Definitely, like this is now a film noir Chicago image, even though it was shot during the daytime. Kind of fun.
Great. Okay, we're going to take one last question. Janice is asking, please repeat how to increase and decrease the size of the circle around the control point.
Great point. I kind of did that very quickly. Good question, Janice. So when you add a control point, you place the point on the object. Of course, you can click on it and move it around, but if the area of influence isn't encompassing the thing that you want it to change the size of the area, you click on the slider that's parallel with this control point itself. And if you drag the slider away from the control point, it makes it bigger, makes a larger selection. And if you drag the slider towards the control point, it makes a smaller selection. That's a great question. I'm sorry if I didn't, you know, say it out loud, or if I went over it very quickly, because that's definitely an important facet of using control points.
Okay, well, thanks, Dan, for a great presentation, and thanks everyone for joining us. Dan, I'll let you go ahead and sign out here, but thanks again, everyone. We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, just one final note before you go, ladies and gentlemen. If you go to nickcollection.dxo.com/webinars, you can see the upcoming webinars. I've got one coming up on the 15th, and then my buddy Photo Joseph has one coming out on the 23rd about adjusting landscape images with Analog Efex Pro. But we also have a ton of recorded webinars and presentations that run the gamut of different kinds of photography, of the different pieces of software, different genres of photography, all that stuff. It's all here. You can also find great videos as well as recorded webinars on the DxO Nick Software website. And the last thing that I wanted to show you was within the customer support section, there's some really great literature here about how to use the software itself. So even if you're not having a problem, like here's installation FAQs and so on, but you want to know more about the functionality of something, or if you want to learn, get a Silver Efex tour, or the advanced tonality controls, there's a lot of information. And again, the way I got to this, if I go back, I'll go back one page. Here, I'm just at the Nick Collection website. If I go to Explore and click on Customer Support, there's a ton of information there. All right, folks, thanks again. Hopefully we'll see you again soon at another webinar, and I hope you join us for part 2 of our Silver Efex webinar. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.